21 years ago, one of the most fatal terrorist attacks took place. 2,996 lives were lost and over 25,000 more injured. The earth fell silent in pure shock and horror. Families suffered, grieved, and wept as they mourned the loss of their loved ones. These attacks left countless innocent Americans in shambles. The start to an ordinary day had ended in such tragedy. Many families have chosen to share their stories. Others have remained silent, but no one will ever forget. This is Henry Ritz, Marley Oceans, and Samantha Poi on More Than a Plane Crash.
The beginnings of this tragic loss of life all dates back to 1990. Saudi Arabia denied the help of Osama bin Laden in favor of gaining aid from the U.S. This greatly angered bin Laden, the son of a billionaire who gained lots of fame and revere for his efforts when the Soviet Union attempted to occupy Afghanistan. He felt as though the people of the Middle East shouldn't accept help from outsiders, especially the U.S., whom he considered to be the ultimate infidels. This caused a wave of hatred within the Jihad network. Both the United States and anyone associated with it were seen as enemies of Allah.
Meanwhile, the chemist, Ramzi Youssef, wanted to go to America in order to kill as many Jews as he could. Over the phone one day, an old childhood friend named Abdul Hakim Murad suggests going to New York due to the large number of Jews that work at the World Trade Center. In 1993, the first attack on American soil was put in motion. Ramzi had placed one of his bombs in the parking garage of the World Trade Center in an attempt to blow it up. However, this attack was only able to destroy a small portion of the building. While it was able to kill 6 and injure thousands, this was still not enough to satisfy Youssef, who dreamed of an even more destructive future.
Fast forward another year to 1994. Youssef has returned to his home country, Pakistan. It is here where he is able to gain protection from the reasonably aggravated U.S. While he is there, he teaches Murad to build bombs, and it is here where they come up with the idea to turn a plane into a bomb. In order to make this dream a reality, the pair enlist the help of Youssef's well-connected uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a making lab. One day, the two accidentally set off their concoction, which causes the smoke to alert the Philippine National Guard. While Youssef leaves, he sends Murad back for the Toshiba laptop containing their plans. In his attempt to retrieve the laptop, Murad is arrested, and the laptop is seized. Following a month of torture, Murad spills the beans about certain details of the plan.
His uncle, Muhammad, to carry on the plan started by Youssef and Murad. Muhammad is able to meet up with Osama bin Laden, who agrees to fund the terrorist project. From there, they begin to develop details for the newly named plane's operation. Teams of men are trained to hijack commercial airliners, making them missiles to attack symbols of American power. While this plan blossoms, so do plans to arrest bin Laden by the CIA. Bin Laden decides to announce himself as a terrorist through the ABC interview. It is here where he also declares a war on the United States.
What you are about to hear are interviews from people experiencing 9/11 as it happened.
I was working in finance up until December of 2000. So in 2001, I switched to a new job, which was working in a private school in White Plains. And I remember driving to work that day and looking at the sky and thinking how beautiful it was, and it was just a clear blue sky. I got to the office and our director of communications came out 10 minutes later and said a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. So immediately I thought, how big is this plane? And she said, I think it was a small plane. So I thought, oh, that must have been an accident, but how could you not see the World Trade Center? It's huge. So then a few minutes later, she came running back and she said a second plane hit the World Trade Center. And right away I said, that was no accident. So at that point, we had about 350 students in our school, and we did have a bunch of students that lived in Manhattan. So they closed off Manhattan. My sister was working near the World Trade Center, so we started calling her cell phone and calling her office phone to see how she was doing, because I think she was across the street from World Trade Center. So we couldn't get in touch with her for a while. In the meantime, at my office, we had to make a contingency plan for all of these students because they closed Manhattan to vehicular traffic entering Manhattan. So the kids couldn't get home. There were no buses going home. What we had to do was call, well, not we, but the school, all the administrators had to call every student's family that lived in Manhattan to see if they could stay overnight at a Westchester family. So, some of the kids, we didn't, the other students didn't know, we weren't friends with, but, we made it happen. Every student had a place to go to that night, and they were taken care of that night. We did have one parent that was at the World Trade Center who passed away, and we did plant a tree in his memory. He had 2 kids going to our school, and the story I heard was that he had called his wife when the first plane hit, and he said, "I'm okay." So she wanted him to leave, but then he didn't leave the second building, and of course, the second plane hit, and he died. Anyway, that's what happened. I was thankful how things worked out, and I wasn't working in Manhattan or working in finance anymore because one of our lead brokers was Cantor Fitzgerald, and they lost a lot of people that day. And it was easy to pick up my daughter from daycare, so we didn't have the issue. Actually, the daycare center stayed open all night to accommodate the parents that couldn't get home in time. And it was not a turning point in my life. I think switching jobs was the turning point, and that had happened, 5 months before 9/11. So, no.
And then,
Well, that did change my views on terrorism. I never thought that terrorists would actually come to this country and harm our citizens here. I always thought of it as, something they do when you're traveling. Wait, did you stop? Oh, stop it.
I was working for the American Lawyer magazine at 26th Street and Park Avenue South. I got off the subway just after 9 o'clock, and it was a beautiful day. And I remember looking down Park Avenue South as I was heading towards my office, and I saw a lot of smoke coming from that direction, but I couldn't see what it was coming out of. And then I walked into the building where I worked, and I remember the security guard telling me that a plane, he thought it was maybe a commuter plane, had hit the World Trade Center. And I thought, on such a clear day, without any clouds or any smog or fog, that there had to have been something medical with the pilot. There was no way that, how clear it was, there was no way that he could have missed the building in front of him. And then when I went upstairs to my office, I found the receptionist was crying, and she just pointed me in the direction of the conference room where there was a television that was on, and my colleagues were watching the Today Show, and let me know that it was a commercial jet, and I had only thought at the time it was just one, and then I watched the replay of the second plane hit the tower. My most vivid memories were when the second plane hit, and I remember somebody someone in my office somehow knew that it was a terrorist attack and that it was perpetrated by Osama bin Laden. Not something that immediately would have dawned on me, but he just had a feeling, and of course it turned out that that's exactly what it was. We stayed in the office from 9 o'clock when it happened until everybody was accounted for. I had people that were working for me that lived in Boston, that lived in New Jersey, that lived in Texas, and lived in San Francisco, and my boss lived in Los Angeles, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was home and not on the roads. I remember one person who worked for us in Dallas was on her way to her office, and we called her and told her to turn around and go back, and she hadn't heard about it yet. And we spent the rest of the morning watching the television. I guess my most vivid memory was watching the first tower fall and finding out that another plane had hit the Pentagon. Then we heard about the plane that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania in a field. And after the first tower fell, I was on the phone with my parents after I spoke to my wife to let her know that I was okay. And I remember my father saying, after the first tower fell down, he said, "That second one doesn't look too steady either." And it was just a matter of minutes later that the second tower fell. It was pretty rapid. It was pretty remarkable how quickly certainly how the country responded and kind of banded together in the days after. There was a tremendous response from first responders, from the police, the fire department, the National Guard. Everybody that could go down to Ground Zero was down there working on that pile and literally hand-picking debris in a bucket brigade, just in case there was anybody that was left trapped or alive. Of course, after that first day, that really wasn't the case. Then it became more of a recovery mission than a rescue mission. But shortly after, President Bush arrived at Ground Zero and got on a pile with a bullhorn and made a statement that that we were going to basically get justice for what had happened. And then after that, it was just a tremendous feeling of patriotism, something that has definitely, everything was completely different in the world, certainly in the country after 9/11. I remember saying to a colleague that lived in New Jersey that morning, once I made sure that she was home and she was safe, and I think she thought that I was being a little dramatic at the time. It was literally just less than an hour after it had happened, and I said, from this point forward, nothing will ever be the same. And she thought, nah, that's a lot of hyperbole. That may not necessarily be the case. And it was months afterward we were speaking, and she said, "You remember what you said that day?" And I remembered. And yes, things have changed, and as we can see, things have changed tremendously. It was an enormous turning point in the country, certainly a turning point in world history and in our daily lives. Prior to 9/11, we weren't taking our shoes off at the airport. We weren't being screened going into every single office building in Manhattan and in other buildings throughout the country. So there has been marked changes in the way that we live, and if that keeps us safe, so be it. That's the way that it has to be. But certainly things turned upside down from that point forward. Before the events of 9/11, and maybe years before that, there had been an attack on the World Trade Center There was a bombing, I believe it was in 1993, where they attempted to take the building down. Then there was also a domestic terrorism that exploded a building in Oklahoma City, which was horrible. So my feelings towards terrorism were always to be, especially working in Manhattan, to be ultra cautious at all times as best you could be. Prior to those events, I think a lot of people thought terrorism was something that happened outside the United States. It was something that we saw in the Middle East. It was hijackings that took place in the 70s. It wasn't something that took place on American soil. So that's why things changed tremendously after 9/11, and it hit home really for the first or maybe the second time. But having it happen in New York City, in the largest city in the country, changed everything. There's a lot of lessons to be learned about 9/11, and it has to do with the way that the country prepares itself and the way that information is exchanged amongst agencies within the government, whether it's now the Office of Homeland Security, which was created after 9/11, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. There needs to be much, much better intradepartmental communication, which clearly did not exist before 9/11. It's a very, very easy thing to look back on now, where hindsight is 2020, and you can say that, well, if they had done this or they had done that, things would have been differently. There were probably warning signs that we absolutely would not have known about at the time because communication between the agencies was so poor.
Hi, I'm Monty Ritz. I'm 49 years old. I was living in New York City when 9/11 happened.
What exactly were you doing on September 11th, 2001?
I was on my way to work. I was working as a stagehand at Lincoln Center, and I showed up to work, and we just got started, and then everything stopped, and our director said a plane had just hit the World Trade Center, and we were not working, and we should be going home immediately.
What was your initial reaction?
My initial reaction was confusion. I didn't really know what was going on. It was a little eerie walking back because it was so beautiful outside. It was a cool day. There were no clouds in the sky, and everyone was a bit dazed. I was walking back, and as I was walking, the Lincoln Center was on the west side. I lived on the east side, and as I was walking back home, several people were just dazed and confused and said, "Did you hear what just happened?" And yes, it was very strange.
Were your first thoughts that it could be a terrorist attack, or did you think it was just a plane with a misfunction?
My first thought was that it was a terrorist attack only because that's what we were told. That someone had flown a plane into the building and it was some kind of an attack.
If you could think of a couple key memories that you have in the moments you found out, in the moments you saw for yourself what had happened, what are they?
So initially when I heard what happened, I have a good friend that worked at the Trade Center. So I ran home, I turned on the TV, and it was weird because everything was kind of, it was on TV, and I was super concerned about my friend, so I ran down to the World Trade Center to see if I don't know what, because I was curious and to see if he was there or if he needed help. And then I found myself in the middle of just debris, and there were bloody shoes on the ground and a bunch of documents, and things were still falling from the sky, and it was quite bizarre. It was very strange.
Do you consider the whole event of 9/11 to be a turning point in your life?
It was a turning point. I mean, it so much seemed to change then. I found myself standing in front of Building 7 at around 11:30 in the morning, and Building 7 didn't collapse until around a little after 5 o'clock that night. And when I looked up, there were only 2 floors that had fire coming out of the windows. And for a building to collapse like that, there's no building that has ever collapsed just because there's a fire in it, especially a steel structure building. So, my world changed only because I was so incredibly skeptical as to why this building collapsed at 5 o'clock. And because it seemed like a building like that could only collapse by a controlled demolition.
Yeah. Well, what did you think about terrorism before the attacks then?
I had followed terrorism just through the news, and I was certainly concerned, although this event really heightened that reality. And I think it was very it was a strange thing to try to understand, because instead of there being just a group that was committing terror or committing a terrorist act, there was so much racial tension involved, and so now all of a sudden it wasn't just this group, but then all of a sudden it was, Muslims did it, or people that were not like, white-skinned person. There after the event, there was so much racial tension, and it heightened everything. So it changed everything at that point. Did I still, and so as far as terrorism, the conversation about terrorism was just thrust into public discourse, and so was racism as well. So that was a very interesting thing to kind of work through. I still feel like we're working through those issues still.
And all of that sources around the government, which leads to my next question. Do you think the government responded correctly? And how do you remember the government responding to the attacks?
Well, it was very odd, because I think eventually Osama bin Laden's name was thrust into the media as the perpetrator, but then somehow we were blaming Iraq and Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction, and there were just some. What was your original question? What was your question again?
How the government responded.
So for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, there was a Secretary General, not for the UN, but there was Hans Blix. I forget his exact title, but he was supposed to be looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and he was not done with his search, and the US intervened and said, you can't finish this search, we're just going to attack Iraq. And so that happened before the assassination of Osama bin Laden, and which was done in Pakistan. And so I don't know. The government response to go into another country and overthrow the government for no clear reason, that is very disturbing to me. And also to go into another country and just assassinate people, that's also a very strange thing. So I think so many years later, I still don't quite know how to respond to the government's response to 9/11. I think it's suspect and strange and unsettling.
So, I mean, did the attacks change your view on terrorism? And do you still feel the same way today? I mean, I already heard about how the government felt, but how did you feel?
Do the attacks change how I feel about terrorism?
As a whole, I know it's a tough question, but let's put it this way, not how you feel, but your view on terrorism.
So we were told, so the public was told that Islamic extremism was there because they hated America, and that's why they were kind of engaged in all of these terrorist activities. But the U.S. had been bombing and terrorizing several other countries years before 9/11, and I think if anybody hated America, it was for good reason, because America has been involved in imperialist activities for decades, and they've been involved in overthrowing other governments and bombing other countries and exploiting other nations and countries and putting unfair sanctions on countries that are just simply unfair. So I think if I was at the receiving end of all of these of U.S. terror activities, I would also be very angry. And so this is for countries or groups that don't have billions of dollars to spend on military, being involved in a terrorist plot of some kind. Not necessarily that it's not good, but it's understandable, and I don't endorse it at all. But I think it's just simply evidence of bad U.S. foreign policy.
To say the events of 9/11 had lasting effects would be an understatement. The effects of that day could be described as nothing short of a living nightmare, with thousands of lives lost, countless families broken, and children not even old enough to walk left orphaned. And for those who survived, they will always be stuck with the guilt and haunting memories that come with watching their friends and coworkers die. On top of that, around 20% of those who survived 9/11 were diagnosed with PTSD, a rate over 4 times that of the general public. Not only that, over 10,000 directly affected developed cancer, with 2,000 dying to 9/11 related illnesses. And the loss just doesn't stop there. On top of the thousands directly affected, an unimaginable number of people felt the pain that comes with the loss of a loved one. Even those who weren't directly involved were dealt with the immense sadness of those around them, feeling the repercussions through the minor changes to everyday life. From the bag checks to the caution on planes, nothing is quite the same. Perhaps once you get through the immense losses felt from 9/11, it's not completely negative, but one thing is for sure, the world will never be the same.
This was Henry Ritz, Marley Oceans, and Samantha Poi. Thank you for watching.